Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of 2011's X-Men First Class, the fifth installment of our X-Men Snicked Rewatch, as we break down all 13 of the Fox X-Men and Deadpool films ahead of Deadpool 3. This movie was a prequel/reboot to the X-Men films that came before, and so it recast some high-profile roles for a look at the start of Charles Xavier's school and his friendship and subsequent rivalry with Erik Magneto. Let's break down this film scene by scene for all the Easter eggs, the links to the MCU, and as always, if you want to avoid any potential Deadpool 3 spoilers, I will leave all of that conversation for the danger room at the end of this video. And to celebrate this X-Men rewatch, we are doing a special X-Men themed merch release, which is really the best way to support New Rockstars. Grab one of these designs by clicking the link in the description. The film opens in Poland in 1944. Director Matthew Vaughn recreated the opening sequence of the 2000 X-Men film shot for shot with different actors. This time the sequence continues after young Erik Lehnsherr is knocked out. The camera pans up to show Sebastian Shaw, played by Kevin Bacon, watching out his rain-soaked window while sipping a cup of tea, like the Kermit the Frog meme, but a Nazi. We're also reminded of the American officers toasting with champagne during Wolverine's origin story. Matthew Vaughn had been hired to direct The Last Stand originally, but he backed out due to some time constraints, and he said later a fallout with Fox executives over a bogus fake script designed to trick Halle Berry. But he was thrilled to be brought back for this film. He actually came onto this movie having just finished directing Kick-Ass, a movie known for having both Quicksilvers in it, Aaron Taylor Johnson and Evan Peters. Hey, remember in WandaVision when Wanda said Kick-Ass and we all lost our minds? Around the same time Erik Lehnsherr's powers are manifesting in Poland, a young Charles Xavier sleeps in his lonely but cozy castle in Westchester, New York. Next to his bed are a baseball, a book, and framed photos of Charles Darwin, whose namesake appears later in this film, and Rita Hayworth in a still from the film You Were Never Lovelier, and Albert Einstein, though this particular photo of Einstein wasn't taken until 1947, 3 years after this particular scene is set. We all learned exactly what Einstein was doing at this point in his life from the movie Oppenheimer. Also in The Last Stand, Kitty Pryde discussed Einstein with Professor Xavier, and he responded, "Yes, but Einstein was not a mutant, as far as we know." The actor playing 12-year-old Charles is Lawrence Belcher, who was cast after Charlie Rowe dropped out due to conflicts with shooting the film Neverland. Young Raven, future Mystique, breaks into Charles's house looking for food and takes on the form of his mother. He immediately knows it's not really his mom, since she'd never be this warm to him. His quick distrust is something in line with their relationship in the comics. After her husband's death, Sharon Xavier remarried Dr. Kurt Marco, who had a son from a previous marriage, Kane Marco, Juggernaut, who we saw in The Last Stand. Dr. Marco was abusive and drove Sharon to alcoholism and depression, so she became neglectful of Charles. So yeah, she probably wouldn't be in the kitchen making him hot chocolate. Charles is thrilled to meet another mutant, and Raven is thrilled that he's not immediately afraid of her in her natural blue-skinned form. He essentially adopts her as his sister, kinda like Wendy did with the Lost Boys and Peter Pan, and without proper legal or parental permission. In the comics, Mystique and Charles' relationship varies. Sometimes they're childhood friends, and sometimes they're enemies. They were technically married at one point, but that's been pretty much ignored. Meanwhile, Sebastian Shaw plays La Vie en Rose by Edith Piaf on the phonograph. Like the photo of Einstein, this would be anachronistic. That song was actually recorded in 1946, 2 years after this scene takes place. The song, though, is about seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, finding the positives or beauty in everyday life. Other Edith Piaf songs have been featured in Loki, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Falcon Winter Soldier. This song featured in Inception. Shaw will later play the same song later on in the Hellfire Club in 1962. Ironic, though, that he's playing it there, which would be the most awful setting possible. Sebastian Shaw offers Erik some chocolate. This is something Nazi scientist Josef Mengele would actually do to children before conducting horrible eugenics experiments on them. And he says,
Die Gene sind der Schlüssel, der die Tür zu einer neuen Zeit öffnet, Erik. Eine neue Zukunft für die Menschheit. Evolution.
There is an actual X-Men comic series called Uncanny X-Men: The New Age, written by Chris Claremont in his return to the X-Men world. He was responsible for creating a lot of Magneto's backstory, so this line about the New Age might be the film's way of paying homage to him. Unlike the first X-Men, when Charles opened the film talking about evolution and mutation as a natural occurrence, Shaw is trying to force mutation through any means necessary. While the Nazis want to use eugenics to breed traits like blonde hair and blue eyes, he wants to use it to create more mutants. There's a really cool reveal when the camera flips to show that this whole conversation has been taking place next to a lab with various weapons and medical torture devices. It makes the audience realize that Shaw has just been doing this whole act, offering chocolate, distancing himself from the Nazis, with this looming threat negating everything. Shaw tries to get Erik to move the coin using only his mind, and in a true Chekhov's gun moment, this is the very coin that Erik will use to kill Shaw later. After he shoots Erik's mother and activates his powers, Shaw actually hands him the coin to keep, the instrument of his own destruction. The image of the coin in Erik's palm flips up to reveal the title of the film, and then we fast forward 18 years to Geneva, Switzerland in 1962. Erik now uses his powers to move the coin through his fingers, which is reminiscent of him keeping the Newton's cradle ball swinging using only his mind in the first film. It's the sort of mental busy work that successfully shows mastery over his powers. He has a board with all the Nazi players he wants revenge on and some string connecting them all. There's a hand-drawn picture of Shaw, which Erik presumably drew himself, and black and white photos of some other people. The fact that there's no photo of Shaw makes me think that he keeps a low profile. We find out later that his powers keep him young, so it would make sense that he doesn't want photographic evidence of his seeming immortality. Erik drives the coin into the photograph, foreshadowing Shaw's death at the end of the film. At a bar in Oxford University, a now 24-year-old Charles Xavier, played by James McAvoy, uses his knowledge of mutations to hit on Amy, a co-ed with heterochromia, a mutation producing two different colored eyes. Jason Stryker, William Stryker's son, had one green eye and one blue eye, just like this woman does. I wonder if she's somehow related to him. She's played by Annabelle Wallis, who played Grace on Peaky Blinders and was also the lead in the crazy horror film Malignant. James McAvoy was the first actor cast for this film, and after he got the role, he shaved his head before learning that it was a period piece and they wanted him to have 60s style hair. So they had to give him hair extensions for much of the film before it grew back. He would shave it again correctly this time for X-Men Apocalypse. After Charles orders Amy a drink, he touches his temple, an indication that he's using his powers to see what she likes. Raven bristles at this flirtation and at Amy, who obviously isn't a real mutant, saying that they should reclaim the word and coining the phrase mutant and proud.
Mutant and proud? Or is that only with pretty mutations or invisible ones like yours? But if you're a freak, better hide.
This actually comes up a few times for Mystique, but it connects to X2 when she tells Nightcrawler that they shouldn't have to hide who they are.
Then why not stay in disguise all the time? You know, look like everyone else.
Because we shouldn't have to.
X-Men has always had parallels to both the civil rights movement and with the film starting in 2000, LGBT rights, and the phrase mutant and proud is similar to sentiments like gay pride or other LGBT slogans like we're here, we're queer, get used to it. Raven asks Charles if he'd date her as her true self, and is definitely hurt that he avoids answering. This sets up how much it means to her later on that Erik wants to be with her in her true form, and helps explain her loyalty to him over the years, although she does sell him out in the last stand after she gets shot with the cure and he abandons her. The Swiss bank manager that Erik goes to get information from is played by James Faulkner, Randall Tarley from Game of Thrones. His photo is actually one of the ones on Erik's board in his hotel room. Erik is able to prevent him from pressing the bank alarm because he's wearing a watch with metal in it. Big mistake! Melting down gold fillings was horribly actually something the Nazis did. Erik turns it on the bank manager here, and we get a shot of the metal filling flying out of his mouth from inside his mouth. Sebastian Shaw's club in Las Vegas is called Atomic. In the comics, Children of the Atom was a phrase used to refer to mutants. There was even a video game with this title released in the 90s. Moira McTaggart, recast here as Rose Byrne, stakes it out. Matthew Vaughn wanted this film to be sort of a soft reboot of the franchise, if necessary, so he told the actors not to study or base their performances on the actors who came before them. He nixed Moira's Scottish accent that she had in the animated series and in The Last Stand when she was played by Olivia Williams. This is also why James McAvoy, who actually is Scottish, has a slightly different accent than Patrick Stewart used. Moira isn't a scientist here. She's a CIA agent keeping tabs on some major players.
Is that Colonel Hendry?
Yes, it is. That's 3 mob bosses, the Italian ambassador, and the CEO of Lockheed.
They can't all be communists. If Hellfire Club's gotta be something else.
This is the first mention of the Hellfire Club in the X-Men film franchise. In the comics, the Hellfire Club was a secret society introduced during the Dark Phoenix saga in Uncanny X-Men number 129. Over the years, they worked both with and against the X-Men, depending on whether their interests aligned. Colonel Hendry is played by Glenn Morshower, who also played General Jacobs in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and has a recurring role in the Transformers movies as General Morshower. He plays a lot of military guys. Emma Frost greets him at the door. She's played by January Jones, who, when this film came out, was better known as Betty Draper from the Mad Men series. And while perfectly cast, in my opinion, in that show, she really doesn't bring much to this role or really to most other projects. As Sebastian Shaw big dogs Colonel Hendry to pressure him into putting Jupiter missiles in Turkey, he once again plays La Vie en Rose, so this is clearly his preferred music to hear before doing terrible stuff. Hendry's been drinking champagne like the military men during the Weapons X procedure in Wolverine's X-Men flashbacks. There's also a bowl of M&Ms on the table, and there are blue ones in there, even though blue M&Ms weren't introduced until 1995. Hey, maybe we're just in an alternate timeline where, you know, everything just kind of got jostled around a couple years. In the room with them is also Janos Kested, aka Riptide. We saw this character briefly at the end of X-Men Origins. In the comics, he can spin his body super fast, and he has the ability to generate bone-like growths that he could release when he was doing that hurricane thing. For the film, the growths were taken out, and now he can just spin hurricanes from his hands. He also wore a lot of purple in the comics, and the suits he wears in this film often have a purple tinge to them. Moira finds Russian documents that translate to something like report contains strategic missile forces, defense capability, preventative deployment. In Emma Frost's diamond skin looks different from the effect used for Emma Silverfox with the diamond skin from the end of X-Men Origins. Visual effects designer John Dykstra said that this was because in Origins, she was only seen briefly and didn't move much. For this film, they wanted to make sure that she had a full range of motion and facial expressions. Frost whistles for Azazel and he teleports in. He's played by Jason Fleming, who's been in a ton of stuff, including the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the character Charles brings up later in this film, as well as the Guy Ritchie banger Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which also starred Last Stand Juggernaut actor Vinnie Jones and was produced by Matthew Vaughn. Vaughn considers Fleming something of a good luck charm because the movies he puts him in have historically done better than the movies that he's not in. In the comics, Azazel and Mystique are the parents of Nightcrawler. Clearly he got the teleporting from his dad and the blue skin from his mom. Simon Kinberg, who wrote this film, said that he and Bryan Singer wanted to make Azazel Mystique's father in these films, but it never made it into the finished product. In The War Room, James Remar plays the unnamed US general. He was also in Oppenheimer, and he played Dexter's dad, Harry, on Dexter. The War Room looks very similar to the one in Dr. Strangelove. That was also a movie about preventing nuclear war with the Russians. The guy on the phone even kind of looks like the president in Dr. Strangelove, who of course was played by Peter Sellers. Charles gets the title that everyone knows him by in the first film,
Professor of Genetics, Charles Francis Xavier.
In Argentina, Erik catches up with two more men on his Nazi murder board. They're played by Ludger Pistor and Wilfried Hochholdiner, who also played Nazis in Inglourious Basterds, which also starred Michael Fassbender, and had a similarly awesome scene set in a bar. Now, a deleted scene would have shown Erik arriving at the Argentina airport and flashing back to a memory of him with his mother. He actually brings this memory up later in this film as one he had forgotten after Charles unlocks it, so it makes sense why they would delete him remembering it here. This insanely tense scene in the bar where we're just waiting for something to happen is absolutely awesome. But unlike the scene in Inglourious Basterds where Michael Fassbender is worried about Nazis finding him out, they have turned the tables now, and the Nazis are now the ones who are sort of undercover, but not really. We just haven't really seen Erik kick ass in this way yet, since in the earlier films he was mostly using his powers or relying on the Brotherhood to do the physical fighting. The guy who claims to be the pig farmer says in German, "We were unter orders," a common refrain of people who have done horrific deeds. And it's interesting that these men are playing checkers, whereas Erik Lehnsherr is almost always shown playing chess. Like they literally cannot compete with him on his level. And like he did with the cops in X-Men 2000 when he turned their guns on them, Erik forces this bartender's gun to the man claiming to be a tailor and mentally pulls the trigger. We get a point of view shot down the barrel of the gun, just like when Erik pulled out the banker's fillings. And I just love that in the midst of all this, Erik takes the time to finish his beer. Like you can see Erik playing out the fantasy that he had played through in his mind for years and just savoring every moment of this. And once again, we get a contrast with Erik's life and Charles's life. As Erik is hunting down Nazis, drinking a beer after a kill, Charles is drinking and partying in a bar. Definitely shows how these men were just on separate paths long before they met. Charles again is hitting on someone by telling her she has, quote, a very groovy mutation. James McAvoy said that he was playing this Charles almost like a different character than Patrick Stewart, and here he's a little bit of a dog. Like he used that line on Moira even while the woman he used it on earlier was sitting a couple feet away, clearly waiting for him. Moira ain't buying this crap though, she's all business. In Miami, Hendry turns down Shaw's offer of champagne this time, much like Stryker refused to drink in X2. These are both men who've seen some crap. They know better than to drink around mutants. A deleted scene would have shown Hendry arriving to find Shaw casually hanging out with a bunch of Cuban military leaders.
Caballeros, me disculpan un momento, no tardo. Ahoy, Colonel Hendry! Oh, tranquilo, everything's fine. We can all be friends here. Good to see you again, Colonel.
Shaw's boat, which we saw a photo of at the bar earlier, is the Caspertina. Matthew Vaughn also named the flying boat in the film Stardust, starring Charlie Cox, the Caspertine. The names are a mashup of Vaughn's children's names, Casper and Clementine. Charles meets with some very important people at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, but this Langley facility wasn't actually built until 1968, but it probably felt more cinematic to show than the random series of buildings where CIA headquarters were before then. Also, the timeline just got, shaken up, and things got all kind of anachronistic. Whatever, Matthew Vaughn clearly just doesn't care. As Charles gives his presentation on human genetic mutation, the graphic image on the left-hand side of the slide actually looks like the X-Men logo. This is an X-ray crystallography image of the DNA molecule. Charles shows off his powers.
I didn't really expect you to believe me, given that all you could think about during my presentation was what sort of pie they were serving in the commissary. It's apple pecan.
The other man in the room is William Stryker Sr., papa of future Wolverine creating villain from X2 and X-Men Origins. To convince them that he's telling the truth, Raven turns into Stryker Sr. just as she would years later into his son when he's played by Brian Cox, in the way that she turns into like half the people in the US government. The one other guy in the room who's excited to meet the mutants is played by Oliver Platt, credited only as Man in Black Suit. Oliver Platt, I love this guy. He's been in everything. FX Fargo series, The Bear. He also played the General Counsel on The West Wing. Charles mentally communicates with Moira after freezing everyone else around her, a trick that he pulled in X2 in the museum and with the president in the Oval Office at the end of that film. Back at Shaw's boat, Eric half emerges from the water, and this entire sequence is very reminiscent of something you might see in a James Bond film. Composer Henry Jackman actually based his score on John Barry's work in those 007 films in the 60s. Another connection comes up in the end credits. The parallels between Shaw and who Eric will become are evident in this scene. Both have strong female bodyguards standing at their side, protecting them. Sean says, "We don't harm our own kind," which Eric has also said, and obviously both of them did and do harm other mutants. There are a bunch of other similarities throughout the film that I'll go into more. Charles saves Eric from drowning and reveals to Eric that there are other mutants, and the relief on Eric's face. Fassbender is just such an amazing actor, and these two guys are really like a perfect pairing. I mean, it's hard to match the skill and the chemistry of Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, but I really think they're doing it here.
I thought I was alone. Eric, you're not alone.
The man in the black suit brings the gang to a covert CIA research base. He's kind of like a Fox Mulder type, if you ask me, investigating the paranormal and getting made fun of for it. But now he's got a team of mutants, so screw the haters.
So we're to be the CIA's new mutant division, yes?
Something like that.
New Mutants is the name of a mutant team, also created by Chris Claremont, as well as one of the movies we'll get to later in the series from 2020. It featured an all-new, all-different cast of X-Men, including Cannonball, Mirage, Sunspot, and Wolfsbane. Similarly, this film features an all-new cast of X-Men, many of whom hadn't appeared on screen before. Producer Lauren Schuler-Donner said that they originally started to talk about doing a Young Mutants movie while they were filming X2, with the idea of it being that the characters we'd already seen, like Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm, in their early days at Charles' school when they were still teenagers. After delving into that idea, she decided it wasn't really working, and instead they needed to explore new mutants with new powers the audience hadn't seen yet. She agreed that the ones in First Class don't really go together at first glance, but the way they and their powers interact just make it work. We meet young Hank McCoy, played by Nicholas Hoult, and Charles immediately outs him to his boss.
How wonderful. Another mutant already here.
Hank? You didn't ask, so I didn't tell.
This is kind of a reference to the don't ask, don't tell military policy that Bill Clinton adopted during his presidency, which was considered somewhat progressive at the time, but in hindsight, not really. Hank shows everyone what he can do, and Raven has a Mary Jane Watson moment.
You're amazing.
You are amazing.
Hank later flirts back in the most nerdy scientist way possible, taking a blood sample while enjoying a romantic meal of Twinkies and Coke. But he's flirt blocked by Eric.
Did I hurt you?
Kinky. By the way, if I looked like you, I wouldn't change a thing.
And Raven's interest starts to shift. Magneto was always very supportive of his followers celebrating their mutantness, and of course in the original movies, Mystique was very comfortable in her normal appearance, so we're starting to see the seeds of that getting planted here. The helmet Shaw wears was designed by the Russians and keeps pesky telepaths from reading his thoughts and influencing him. It's black and gray here before Eric will give it his paint job. Eric steals some CIA info on Shaw and tries to leave like a thief in the night, but Charles stops him.
I've felt your agony. I can help you.
I don't need your help.
Don't kid yourself. You needed my help last night. It's not just me you're walking away from. Here, you have the chance to be part of something much bigger than yourself.
Charles makes a similar offer to Wolverine in the first film, if you remember.
Logan, it's been almost 15 years, hasn't it? Living from day to day, moving from place to place, with no memory of who or what you are.
Shut up.
Give me a chance. I may be able to help you find some answers.
Around here, there was a deleted scene that would have shown Charles unsuccessfully hitting on Moira again.
This is my job, Charles.
I completely respect your decision.
Read my mind now.
Right.
Yeah, probably best they left that one out. In the original X-Men 2000 film, Charles said Eric helped him build Cerebro, but here it seems like Hank did a lot of the work.
They call it Cerebro. As in the Spanish for brain? Yes.
The spherical room calls back the design from the original movies. It also kind of looks like the spaceship Earth Dome in Epcot. Hank asks Charles if he won't let him shave his head, one of several references throughout the film to the fact that he'll later be totally bald. There are a few familiar mutants when Charles uses Cerebro the first time, including Storm with her long white hair, and Cyclops wearing sunglasses and playing with a baseball. The girl with the ponytail and same shot as Cyclops is maybe supposed to be Jean Grey, but it's not clear. There's also this little kid sitting in a chair reading a comic book, and we looked and we looked and we looked and we tried to figure out what exact issue of comics this was. All I can really tell is that the guy in the red suit with the mutton chops kind of looks like the early versions of Sebastian Shaw. So the first mutant that Erik and Charles recruit is Angel Salvadore, played by Zoe Kravitz. She also played Letta Lestrange in the Fantastic Beasts films and plays Selena Kyle in Matt Reeves' The Batman. In the comics, she has the powers similar to a housefly, including the ability to shoot digestive acid at people out of her mouth, which we actually see her demonstrate later. A deleted scene here would have shown Charles using his powers to make Erik appear like he's dressed as a woman.
It's good, isn't it? What?
In Days of Future Past, we see a screenshot of Angel's autopsy, which puts her death at around 1 week after the events of this film. Oh. Next, the guys recruit Darwin, played by Eddie Gaffegi. Dev from For All Mankind, he has the ability of reactive adaptation. Like, he should be able to adapt his body to fit changing scenarios and environments. But we'll see later, this movie doesn't let it. Then they meet Lucas Till playing Alex Summers, aka Havok. In the comics, Havok is Cyclops' brother. He has the ability to transform plasma energy into energy blasts. Till played MacGyver in the recent reboot of that show. Then they approach Sean Cassidy, aka Banshee, played by Caleb Landry Jones. In an interview, Jones said that given his red hair and his freckles, he always knew he'd never get to play Batman or Superman, so when he heard what they wanted for First Class, he was so excited to finally get to be able to play a superhero. The visual effect of Banshee's scream was done through a digital ring-like structure based on renderings of sound waves. Then we get what is many people's favorite part of this movie, this awesome cameo from Hugh Jackman as Wolverine.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lensher.
Charles Xavier.
Go fuck yourself.
Jackman said that when he was approached to appear, he knew that this movie was PG-13 and was excited that he was going to get to say the one and only fuck in this film. The scripted line was fuck off, but he did one take where he improvised a slight variation, and that's the one that made it in. This cameo makes him the actor who played the same comic book character in the most X-Men films. And since this is in the 60s, this would be before James Howlett ever came across Team X or William Stryker. Notice how over his shoulder there's a neon sign for Marv's Beer, which is a reference to Matthew Vaughn's production company Marv Films. Charles and Erik play chess in front of the Lincoln Memorial. They play chess many times throughout these films. Also, the World War II Memorial is visible in front of the Washington Memorial, even though the World War II Memorial wasn't built and open to the public until 2004. At the research base, the mutant youths give themselves code names. They are comic monikers. It's a cool scene that shows the characters goofing off and having some fun and revealing the identities that they've had to keep secret for so long, but also just a nice way of showing us what everyone is capable of. It gives us some context for the action that follows. Alex demonstrates his powers with the others watching, doing this sort of peeking around the corner, stacked heads thing that is very John Hughes-esque.
Get back.
Lauren Schuler Donner has said that when the concept for the film was still teen mutants in school, one of the reasons it wasn't working was because it just felt too much like a John Hughes movie. But we would see in the MCU, John Watts totally used John Hughes inspirations to make the Spider-Man trilogy as good as it was. Alex has trouble aiming his power. This is part of his arc in the film and is also shown in the comics. You can actually see some scorch marks on the side of the building from where he missed his target with one of the blasts. They immediately get busted for partying and general teen shenanigans. On their way to the Russian military retreat, Charles uses his powers to make it seem like there's no one in the back of the truck. This is from an extended scene that was actually cut down. The deleted part would have shown the dog knowing they were there.
Can't you control it? It doesn't work on animals. Too stupid, I think.
Another deleted scene would have shown more of Erik using his powers against the soldiers in the military retreat. Charles gets uncomfortable with Erik's brutality as he uses metal to choke Emma until she shifts out of her diamond form. Charles uses his powers to see what Shaw is planning. An extended version of the scene would have also shown Shaw sitting in the White House. Shaw's plan is pretty bonkers, folks. He's assuming that mutants are children of the atom created by radiation and therefore that they are impervious to nuclear radiation. This seems like a wild thing to just assume is true. It's also kind of reminiscent of Magneto's plan in the first movie when he was going to use the device to either mutate or kill all humans. Yet another similarity between the two men. In the vision, there is a logo of a blue flag, which is presumably the Hellfire Club's logo that would become the new one for this new world. It's similar to the one from the comics, just with the two vertical lines that make up the H removed. It seemed like the filmmakers wanted to link this one aligned more closely to the Nazi flag, so it just kind of combined the designs. These two douchey CIA guys mock the mutant group, and Hank shows them his trademark restraint by just closing the curtains on them. Shaw attacks with Azazel teleporting people high into the air and letting them drop until it's basically raining suited bodies. It's just brutal. It definitely reminds me of Nightcrawler taking out the Secret Service agents in X2, but at least those guys survived. Shaw gives them the hard sell.
There's a revolution coming. Each of us will face a choice. Be enslaved or rise up to rule.
Shaw definitely intentionally looks at Darwin when he says, be enslaved. But again, lots of parallels to Magneto here. Politically, they have a lot of the same goals and are both very skeptical when it comes to humans and mutants peacefully coexisting. Their only big difference is that Shaw lives as a human, not revealing his powers unless absolutely necessary, and he has never really faced oppression, whereas Erik was oppressed for being Jewish and knows what it's like to be on that side. So he comes from a more experienced and compassionate perspective. That's why Shaw wants to live like kings and queens, but Erik just wants mutants to be free. He pulls out the old, if you're not with us, you're against us attitude that's a favorite among dictators and just generally terrible people. He also says,
you can stay and fight for the people who hate and fear you, or you can join me.
This mirrors something Wolverine told Storm in the first movie.
The whole world out there is full of people that hate and fear you, and you're wasting your time trying to protect them. I got better things to do.
Angel joins Shaw, and Darwin steps up and is done dirtier than any other character in all of these movies.
Adapt to this.
Adapt to this? That's so mean to the character. And talk about the filmmaker was mean to the character. In the comics, Darwin survived some crazy stuff, and it just sucks that we didn't get to see more of this character. It's also not a great look, Matthew Vaughn. Justice for Darwin. At the CIA, Emma Frost is in custody, and there's a cool series of shots where we hear the men talking about her as the camera stays on her and spins around. Then it's revealed that they are not in the same room. She is using her powers to listen in on everything that's been said. At Charles's mansion, he starts training the titular first class. In the comics, the original students that we met were Beast, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Iceman, and Angel. There's some real archival footage of John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev in the days leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which lasted for 13 days during October 1962. This is intercut with training scenes at the mansion, and the team is being outfitted with sweet new gear. Erik tries to get Charles to shoot him in the head, saying that he can deflect it. We saw him control a bullet this way in the first film, pressing it mid-fire against a man's head. A lot of these scenes had extended sequences that were cut down in the edit, including ones of Havok and Banshee training.
Alex, for God's sake, don't just stand there, pick up a fire extinguisher and help me!
Why are you yelling at me? I warned you.
I'm sorry, Alex, but in the field you could have killed one of your teammates.
He asked me to cover him.
Alex, that's not what I meant. I'm sorry.
I didn't want to get involved. It's not my fault.
Promise me one thing. When I die jumping off this window, you gotta bury me in this.
Pull yourself together. It's only one story.
Charles quotes Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to Hank and summarizes Hank's struggle as one to conform versus one of accepting his true nature. And the literary reference is particularly apt given his eventual transformation, which comes from his desire to be normal. Hank laps Charles during their run, a move that Steve Rogers does to Sam in Captain America Winter Soldier, although Hank catches up to Charles on his right. While Charles is helping the rest of the team, Erik helps Mystique.
If you're using half your concentration to look normal, then you're only half paying attention to whatever else you're doing.
Hank explains that Raven's cells age at half the rate of everyone else. It seems like it's this movie's way of rectifying why she was still so young looking in the other films, whereas Charles and Erik were like old men. An extended version of the scene would have shown Hank trying to recapture their earlier interrupted romantic moment and failing.
Beautiful on the inside, huh?
And the outside.
Well, this isn't really me, though, is it, Hank? I mean, you might as well be complimenting my shoes.
The training sequence culminates with Charles asking Erik to move the satellite dish, calling back the beginning of the film when Shaw asks Erik to move the coin. Charles, of course, uses very different tactics than Shaw does, and it contrasts the two men nicely. Charles unlocks an old memory of Erik and his mother celebrating Hanukkah. When Charles says that there's good in Erik, really what he's talking about is his capacity to love. His powers first activated when his loved ones were threatened. Behind all that anger he felt, it was love that started it all, and this is what Charles is able to help Erik connect to. Shaw, on the other hand, said it was anger that activated his powers because he fundamentally misunderstands love. Hank presents Raven with a gift, a serum created using her DNA that will make them look, quote, normal. But she's starting to accept who she is and urges him not to take it. Hank pulls an absolute dick move, telling her that her natural blue form will never be deemed beautiful, and damn dude, that's cold! He basically shoves her into Erik's arms. Erik and Charles play chess again. Erik criticizes Charles for thinking all humans are like Moira, and Charles gives it right back, saying Erik thinks all humans are like Shaw. This shows the inherent flaws in both men's approaches to the mutant-human conflict of the years. Then we get this line.
Killing Shaw will not bring you peace. Peace was never an option.
An instant classic that has turned into many, many memes involving angry ducks. And just like Jekyll, Hank injects himself and it goes horribly wrong, turning him into the beast everyone is familiar with. When Raven attempts to seduce Erik, she transforms into Rebecca Romijn, who of course played Mystique in the original films. But Erik says he prefers the real Raven, and you know she's been waiting her whole life for a man to say this to her. He's also the one who encourages her to essentially go nude, likening her to a tiger and saying no one would ever cover up a tiger. Charles is kind of horrified though, as anyone would be who found their adoptive sister naked. He asks if he has to read her mind to figure out what's wrong, and she says he promised her he'd never do that. All of this helps explain why Raven ultimately chooses to go with Erik in the end. A deleted scene after this one would have shown Charles and Moira sharing champagne in a kiss.
It is very beautiful, you know.
What?
The mutated MCR1 gene. Auburn hair, it's very beautiful. It's a beautiful mutation.
Mutation took us from single-celled organisms to the most dominant form of
Life on the planet.
Hank creates uniforms for everyone, and they're blue and yellow, like the original suits worn in the comics from 1963 until Jack Kirby's departure. Beast's appearance in this movie is done with makeup over CGI, unlike The Last Stand, which was done with just makeup and prosthetics. The situation in Cuba heats up, but Charles intervenes just in time, influencing this guy to abort the launch. This is actually similar to two different real-world events. The first took place in Cuba during the 1960s, when the United States Army detected a Russian submarine off the coast of Cuba and started firing upon it. The Russians, out of contact with Moscow, thought a war might have broken out and wanted to nuke the American ships. However, one of three men whose responsibility it was to launch the nukes, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to give permission to launch. Upon returning to Russia, they were reprimanded by Russian officials and told they should have gone down with their ship rather than risk discovery by the enemy. The second event happened in the 1980s, when Stanislav Petrov, the man monitoring the Russian nuclear detection system, saw readings that indicated the United States had launched nuclear missiles at Russia. However, Petrov determined that the readings were an equipment malfunction and did not alert his superiors. After the fact, both of these men have been labeled the man who saved the world, but neither of them were ever rewarded or thanked by their government. As the Blackbird crashes, Erik uses his powers to hold Charles against the ceiling to keep him from being thrown around the plane. This is a fake out moment which leaves the audience wondering if this is how Charles will lose the ability to walk. The effect of Shaw absorbing the energy is really cool. It looks like his body is dividing to contain all of that power. The two sides face off, and Angel is firmly on team bad guy now, showing no reservations about fighting her old friends. Erik gets the showdown he's wanted since he watched Shaw kill his mother. Shaw busts out every mental manipulation tactic from the villain handbook.
I'm sorry for what happened in the camps. I truly am. But everything I did for you. To unlock your power. To make you embrace it.
Erik tearfully agrees with Shaw that he made him stronger. Shaw is the creator and Erik is Frankenstein's monster. Erik gets his helmet off and dons it himself to block out Charles, like blocking out his conscience. And then we get the sickest moment of this movie.
If you're in there, I'd like you to know that I agree with every word you said.
We are the future.
Unfortunately, you killed my mother.
Later on, the MCU will echo this moment when Iron Man tells Captain America that he doesn't care who the Winter Soldier is, just that he wants revenge because, quote, he killed my mom. And then Erik counts to 3, just like Shaw did before he shot his mother. And the way McAvoy just screams in pain during this, it's like we can feel the coin going through our head. But previously, when he was training Erik, Charles told him that he could feel what Erik felt when he was inside his mind. And I think that's why he's really screaming here, because he can basically feel what Shaw is feeling as a coin is driven through his head. This is communicated really well with match cutting back and forth between Charles and Shaw. Like the framing is just perfect as the camera glides to the right. Also, I think that Erik does this really slowly so that Shaw can't absorb the energy out of the coin pushing against him. Or maybe he's just doing it to torture him more. Stryker Sr. wants to take out all the mutants at once, and he's even willing to sacrifice Moira to do it. Yeah, like father, like son, they're a whole family of dicks. And just like Erik will do with the guns outside that train station, he slowly turns the missiles and the warheads back back on the ships. Erik tries to get him to stop by saying the men on the ships are just following orders, and dude, you know, you could have picked a different way to convince him because that's exactly what those Nazis in the bar said. You know, it's not great. As they fight, Erik uses his powers to fling the others back so they can't intervene. And notice that he doesn't do this to Raven. He already knows that she's on his side. Moira shoots at him, and he deflects one of the bullets, which hits Charles' spine. Erik digs it out, but it's too late. This is how he loses the ability to walk. Erik says,
I want you by my side. We're brothers, you and I. All of us together, protecting each other.
He always saw mutant kind as his family, which is why he eventually goes on to call his group the Brotherhood of Mutants. Erik tries to recruit the others. Raven, Angel, Riptide, and Azazel all go with him. Beast, Banshee, and Havok stay with Charles. Producers said they wanted the audience to see Erik throughout the film as not necessarily being wrong in what he was trying to do, so that when some mutants ultimately join him, you can see why. Charles gets his signature X-wheeled wheelchair. Despite the fact that he trusts Moira, he still makes her forget everything about where he is and who he's with, so the CIA can't force it out of her. Erik breaks Emma out, and he's now in his red outfit, fully embracing his Magneto moniker. The animation over the end credits is based on those in the opening credits of Dr. No, continuing with the James Bond connection established with the score. It's also worth noting that Stan Lee did not have a cameo in this film, and it's only the second time in a Marvel film since X2 that he doesn't show up. There's also no mid or post-credit scene in this movie. Okay, so First Class holds up. Pretty great movie. Matthew Vaughn seemed more about the style and the tone of going back to the swinging 60s, but didn't really care about nailing down the details. Still a lot of fun. Up next in the series, we'll be breaking down James Mangold's The Wolverine from 2013. But first, let's go into the danger room, where we're going to discuss some possible Deadpool 3 spoilers. So Matthew Vaughn in recent days said that he actually saw snippets of Deadpool 3, and he said that it would give a jolt to Marvel Studios, and basically said it's going to save the whole franchise. But I am asking, why would Vaughn get to see parts of this movie? It kind of seems like stuff he made for X-Men First Class is going to be featured in Deadpool 3 somehow. What from X-Men First Class could come back in Deadpool 3? At the top of that list, Kevin Bacon, Sebastian Shaw. Maybe we'll get a callback to Wolverine's "fuck you" in the bar. Maybe we could get a restaging of the events on that Cuban beach, because notice that location that we've seen in set leaks, that is a sand-covered ground. We might be looking at a beach of some kind. Thank you so much for watching this video. Big thanks to Gina Ippolito for writing this script. Come check out our live show in Los Angeles on February 15th at Braindead Studios. Tickets still available in the description below. I'm Erik Voss. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.